You are listening to Hilary Topper on Air, the small business podcast to help you grow both personally and professionally. And now, here's your host, Hilary Topper.
What if everything we thought we knew about running shoes, from energy return to performance enhancement, was wrong? I'm Hilary Topper, and welcome to Hilary Topper on Air. Today, we have a special guest joining us. His name is Scott Tucker, and he is the CEO of Vimazi Shoes. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So, first off, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also tell us how you decided to start Vimazi, the brand, and where that came from. With so many brands out there, so many running shoes out there, like, how did you come up with this idea, and how do you plan to break through the market?
Well, I'm going to start off in a different way than my usual spiel of where I came from and how I grew up running and lifetime runner and competing in all kinds of different things and then getting into the shoe industry. And just say from the outset that when you introduce me as CEO, it sounds like kind of grandiose and so forth, because that is the title they give you when you form a corporation, a C Corp in the USA. And the fact is that I'm a one-man band. So, it's not actually grandiose. And starting a shoe company, is an ordeal. And it is risky, and it is, fraught with all kinds of issues that come flying at you that you never expected and so forth. Just to say that, yes, I am the one that founded and created this new brand, and that don't be, uh, don't think that just because I've got like this fancy title that I somehow make 37 times the salary of the average worker, kind of thing.
Well, we
But
all know that that's not true.
yeah, right. Yeah. But really, I've been in the footwear business and in running for almost 30 years, and and worked my way up from working in the warehouse to to doing operations and getting into shoe designs and developing and so forth. And it was all motivated and like inspired just by my love of the sport and just fascination with it all and so forth. And my educational background was in physics, and so I tend to look at things this way. And I um just did a lot of learning for most of my life, of just saying, well, this is what's out there, and asking questions and trying to understand how the world works, so that I could apply it to my job. And I came to a point where we're making shoes, and we're having to make decisions on like how are we actually going to engineer these things, and what are the properties, the physical properties of the materials we're putting in and so forth. And I started asking questions about why. Why is it this way, not that way, and so forth. And I couldn't find the answers. And I read everything, and I read it at a level that was, as technical as they get. And the questions weren't answered. They actually have been making shoes, not because they know from any sort of physics or material science basis like why it should be this way to work with the body in a specific way. They do it because that's what they did before, seemed to work, and so let's just do more of that. And that was really unsatisfying to me. And as I dug deeper and deeper and found that they didn't have an answer, I thought there's an opportunity here. If I can figure this out, maybe I can do something better. And then I eventually did figure that out. And I said, we can do so much better. And this is really going to be valuable and meaningful for people who like to keep running and to stay healthy and to feel better, and walking as well, and almost any kind of activity. So that was like my whole motivation behind saying, hey, let's start up a new company. Um, there's an entrepreneurial spirit to all of that too, and by the way, I mean, let's put this in a time frame. This was happening in this 2015, 16, 17 kind of time period in my head. And the world was kind of captivated with startups, and like, if you have a great idea, you can go for it and people will back you. And I was very much taken by all of that, as opposed to I'm just going to go work for the man some more and just, sell my soul and, give up all my great ideas for somebody else's gain. So I was caught up in that. And that's why I decided, like, I'll do it this way, as opposed to just, trying to find somebody who thinks that my ideas are worth considering. And you know, I had enough business experience. I thought I knew really what I was getting into. Of course, I was making assumptions about how the world was and where it was going, what was happening with e-commerce, and what was happening to retail and so forth. And then the pandemic hits. And so, like, everything kind of got the whole, rule book got rewritten and so forth. As it turns out, I didn't know that much about what I was getting into. Now I know more since I've been in it, and I'm still in it, and it's still the greatest idea. So that's my
And
story.
it's very cool that you are the CEO and you're accessible. That's very cool. So, I just wanna say that. But anyway, so let's talk about energy return in running shoes, okay? Which many brands feature this as their key feature, but I know you and I had talked about this and that there's a fundamental flaw here. Can you break down why this idea is scientifically incorrect?
Yes. So this idea of energy return is based on a spring, right? That a spring is, let's just say you're compressing it. And when you compress that spring, you convert this, kinetic energy into what they call spring potential energy. It's kind of like a temporary storage within the spring. And then the spring pushes it back and it goes back into kinetic energy, right? And we call that a return, right? Because first it went in and then it came back. So we said it got returned. And the springs are real. We know this, and we can model them carefully, so forth. So I'm not saying that there aren't springs in the world, but the whole idea of getting energy into the spring and then back out again assumes that the mass that we're talking about is a rigid object, like a steel object, say, right? I mean, totally rigid, so that the whole thing moves as a unit. And in fact, when people are testing shoes and they're talking about like this particular super foam has more energy return than this other one, they're testing it by dropping these rigid objects onto it, up and down, right? And the human body is not rigid. And it's not rigid, not because we have squishy things in our body. It's not rigid because we have joints. And okay, that's not news to anybody, right? We move with muscle powered joints. But you have to really grab onto that concept and let it sink in, because what it means is that for anything to push your body, push your whole body, meaning your center of mass, like collectively, to push it, right, and move it as if it was a rigid object, those joints have to become rigid. those joints, the muscles of those joints have to exert energies or, a force to keep the joints from moving. Because if you push on a joint, right? So I mean, you just imagine your body and your foot, right? And if you push on the bottom of your foot, if the joints, connected all the way up through your body, right? They're bent joints, and of course when you're running, they're bending and moving. If they don't resist that force that's being pushed up from underneath you, then they're just going to flex. And so that force from the spring underneath your foot, it's called a contact force, it's going to push on the bottom of the foot, and those joints are going to flex. So it's not going to actually move your whole body unless you exert an equal and opposite force on those joints to keep them from moving. That's Newton's third law. So if you're going to move something, right, you put on it with a force, it has to exert this equal and opposite force the other way. And when you have a system of joints, that means you have to exert that force into the joints so that they don't move. So in the end, yes, you can push up with a spring, and it doesn't matter where that energy came from. It could be a motor down there. It could be an explosion. It could be, a spring that compressed. It doesn't matter. If you push up, you have to exert the same amount of energy to create that tension in the joints so that they don't move in order for the whole body to move. So in the end, you don't get any energy return. There's no net gain to it. And that's just, fact of the universe. That, you don't get any gain from it.
So many people believe, right, that these carbon plates that are now in many of these very high-end shoes and these special foams that are in certain shoes help them run faster. Are you saying that that's a complete misconception?
Yeah, it's a complete misconception. So there's a subtlety here, which is worth talking about, I think, for a moment, because these terms get thrown around and they get confusing. So running faster is like saying something different than saying running with using less energy. And we want to keep those things straight. So, the South African sprinter, Pistorius, or I forget exactly how to pronounce his name. Anyways, right? He is the double amputee that has the blades, and he was an Olympic sprinter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, they accused him of, being able to run faster because he had these big springs in his lower legs. And there have been people who have had that kind of prostheses and have run on treadmills and so forth and achieved these really high speeds, like they've run fast. That doesn't mean they could keep it up. It means that they had this other spring and they had to exert additional force and energy in order to go faster. So they didn't get it for free. They had essentially a lever that let them go faster, just like on a trampoline, you can jump higher, but you got to do the work.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what happens, for the double amputee sprinters. They can do the work and they can get up to a higher speed, but they're not saving energy in doing it. So they're not, able to use that energy to finish a marathon faster, which is kind of the whole idea behind the energy return thing, is that it's not that you're actually going faster. I mean, you watch a marathon, like they can all run at the same speed for most of the race. But some of them have more energy at the end of it and they can kind of keep it up. And that's where we think, like, oh, well, if they have energy return, they're saving energy. But it's not because they're actually running faster. They're just able to use less energy along the way, so they have more left over at the end. So those things are different, related, but different kinds of concepts. And the thing about that we're talking about is, that there isn't energy return, so there's not this greater efficiency and so forth. It doesn't matter which material we're talking about, whether we're talking about bending carbon plates or we're compressing and expanding foams, or we have a special spring in there or whatever. Those things, it doesn't matter what the configuration is, they still cannot save you energy because the body still has to produce that energy in the muscles, right? To create the right tension in the joint so that you can move, whether or not you're pushing on the bottom or not. So that's why it doesn't matter. The question I think that you were getting at is like, well, if it's not there, if there was nothing beneficial about it, how come so many people swear by it? Like, what's up with that? And there, I think, are a lot of answers to that question that are all true, which is that there's a lot of things going on in our minds when we're running and feeling different things, and interpreting them. But it doesn't mean that what we're feeling is actually what is happening with us, metabolically. We feel different sensations under our feet, which we are highly attuned to do because, staying upright and, taking steps and never falling down and, being very precise about how we move about in the world is, of utmost importance. So we're, highly attuned to all of those sensations that we experience. And if we get something that's a little bit, different, whatever, more toe rocker or something like that, we feel this stuff. It doesn't mean we interpret it in the right way, but we definitely feel it. And if you convince yourself that what you're feeling is better, well, then it's a placebo effect and it probably is going to be better. And like I would say, pour on more placebo effect if you can, but you can do that for free. You don't have to
Right.
spend $250 for it. So that's, I think, we could keep going on and on about it,
Yeah.
but I think that, that it doesn't get any deeper than the fact that the world, especially the footwear world and the world of biomechanics, has been simplifying our motion as though it was a rigid object because that's easier to do.
Hmm.
And they haven't been explicitly incorporating the motions of joints. And because of that, they missed the whole boat. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is really good stuff. And I just wonder about the risks to runners who rely on these types of shoes, Like how might they be inadvertently increasing stress on their muscles and tendons? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Great question. Right, because it leads exactly into this misinterpretation. So what the industry concluded from this, they said, well, if a spring is good, a bigger spring is even better. And so we get this higher and higher stack heights, right? To the point where, the World Athletics said, time out, we have to put a limit to this. This is like getting crazy. People are playing, this game, with whatever, unfair advantages and so forth. And, they thought that, a thicker shoe was sort of like playing with a bigger tennis racket when you're playing tennis, right? Because you could hit the ball faster or something, is that sort of like mindset. Thicker shoe meant bigger spring, meant more advantage. And in fact, thicker shoe and them being soft so that they would compress and so forth has really kind of a disastrous consequence. And and this comes right back to joints and how we move. And so you get this cushion effect from landing on it, and we're like, yeah, but cushioning's good. We like that. And I agree. But we're not rigid objects, and we don't have peg legs, right? I mean, we have all of these joints in our ankles and feet. And as everybody knows, whether you're a heel striker or forefoot striker, right? I mean, the forces under your foot move from the rear portion forward. You push off of the forefoot. You can't manage to push off from your heel. It just doesn't work that way. You can't go forward. You can go backwards, but you can't go forward that way. It's just how things hinge, right? And because we have to stay in balance side to side, right? We pronate, right? And we pronate because our legs are on either side of our pelvis, and we have to kind of get our feet more towards our center line and more towards the middle so that we stay upright. Otherwise, you're going kind of rocking back and forth from one side to the other, which still would create a kind of pronation kind of stuff. It would just be more jerky. But anyway, so we can smooth that out by bringing our leg over laterally. So we have these lateral motions with every step. They're not that large, but it's our whole body moving. So the forces are actually, quite great. All right. So that happens and our bodies have evolved to deal with it. Fine. What happens when you put a big, thick, soft piece of foam underneath your forefoot when you're going side to side? Well, it doesn't compress evenly. It compresses and it tips towards the inside. Well, this creates a problem. It actually accentuates the stress that all of your tendons have to withstand when you stop yourself from going sideways, right? When we step, our bodies, kind of shift your weight, right? It kind of moves a little bit towards the center line, and that has to stop, right? And then has to go the other way. So it's the starting and stopping thing that creates this sudden change of direction, sudden accelerations. And if you overdo it, the tendons get stressed out too much, and then they get irritated, and we can get injured. And so we want to try to mitigate that for some people, and that's what led to the whole, orthotics to begin with for a lot of people. Is they're like, well, your arch is collapsing too much, it's going over that's creating all of this, greater accelerations and so forth. So we're going to prop it up so that it doesn't happen so much more. So it's the same idea. They're trying to, mitigate those accelerations so that they're not so hard on your tendons. Well, when you put a soft shoe underneath your foot, underneath your forefoot, it goes the other way. You accentuate those things because it tips even more. And you can do a calculation that shows that for every additional millimeter of side to side tipping that you get, right? So more tipping on the inside underneath your, big toe, that's where the force is greater. For every millimeter more it compresses, that acceleration force, it's actually called jerk. I don't want to have to get into it, but it kind of makes intuitive sense. You get this sort of jerking motion that's going to cause problem. Goes up by 10%. So the thicker the shoe gets, the more of that kind of compression you get. And so it just keeps accentuating that. And that leads to injuries, as we understand it from experience. So I'm not going to get into the physiology of this thing, but just strictly on a mechanics basis, you have to stop this motion. There's certain forces and there's a rate of acceleration. And when that increases, you have to stop that too. And that causes stress. And that's what the tendons have to deal with. And if you overdo it, which we can easily do, the more you run, right? I mean, it just
Yeah.
happens.
Mhm.
You can get injured. And the thicker the shoe is, the worse it gets. So that's what's been the main consequence of having thick cushioned shoes, where it's soft so that you get this shock absorption, but then it's soft under the forefoot too.
So is there, you're talking about these thick shoes. What about the flip side of it? Some of these like barefoot shoes. I mean, are those good for you?
Uh, exactly. When you have a barefoot, right? Well, just say you're going barefoot. Forget about the shoe,
Yeah.
right? So you have no cushioning at all. Therefore, there's no increase in how much you're, pronating or, changing the accelerations. And well, that works out for, has worked out for millions of years. um, but if you're running a lot and you're on asphalt and concrete, right? You've got this other problem, which is this jarring at impact all the time.
Oh
So we
boy.
want to put some cushioning under there,
You
right?
need
And that's
something.
that's what people found out when,
Hmm.
whatever it was 20 years ago, and the barefoot
Mm.
running fad kind of took over again, because people were like, my knees are feeling better now, my ankles are feeling better, right? Because they're not like getting that overpronation anymore. They're feeling better about that, but there was some other consequences to it.
Right.
But we want to
Exactly.
find this balance. And that's really what it's all about, is trying to mitigate one thing without exacerbating another one.
So talk to us about Vimazi shoes and what makes it different than everybody else's shoes.
Right. So that was the nut of the problem, that I said we have to figure this one out, because we want to have this cushioning to, that we got this vertical impact when you land, and we want to cushion that essentially so that it takes some of the stress off of, our heel or Achilles, or, everything that's, associated with that. But at the same time, we don't want to make this other lateral problem worse. And the solution that I came up with was, okay, well, let's figure out how to change the densities in the shoe such that we can get the best of both worlds. We can get that vertical impact cushioning, but when you're in push-off phase, right, the whole second half of the stance, right, you are pushing in, all of the force is going onto the forefoot, and it gets concentrated increasingly over under the big toe. So you're going to be compressing any kind of soft material underneath it. So don't make it so soft, was the simple solution. But how much firmer to make it, right? So that's where, the engineering comes in. It's like,
Mm.
okay, well, I could just make it rock hard. But then, there's other consequences of that. Well, if you're forefoot striking and so forth, you still want some cushioning. When you're going uphill, you're not landing on your heel. And so there's all of these practical experience reasons that you want some cushioning underneath your forefoot, but you want to minimize it to the point that you get as much impact kind of cushioning under the forefoot, but without creating too much side to side, motions there. And so that's the simple solution that, in simplistic terms, that was the solution that I came up with for Vimazi, was to just engineer it with these essentially two different zones of the foot. Now, there was a bunch of other subtle things that go into that, but that's kind of the gist of it. And I would just want to emphasize that this is completely different from what anybody else has ever done before, because not only because they weren't thinking in terms of joints and tendons and so forth, they've been thinking in terms of like energy. Well, let's try to get more energy out of the shoe, right? And I'm thinking like I got to preserve the tendons, right? Because the tendons preserve your muscles and bones,
Right.
and we have
And
to
keeps
take
you
good
running.
care of the tendons. And we know this from life experience that when the tendons get even a little bit unhappy, they
Mm-mm.
cry out really loudly,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's the pain that hurts more than anything. I mean, break a bone doesn't hurt as much as, a tendon that's inflamed. I mean, it won't even let you stand on it, right? It can be really bad. And I think the body does this. Now, this is me getting over my depth, but I'll just say it anyways, because I think it's kind of common sense. The body is telling us these things are so important. It has to heal before you do anything else. So I'm going to make these signals that make it hurt so much that you don't run anymore. um, Right. And then, we have to get over our injuries and so forth in order before we get back to it. But, back to the core design was to try to get that balance in a shoe just right so that we could continue to do the kind of training that we like to do without increasing our risk of getting to injury.
So you have a lot of different shoes on your website that people can order. I happen to have 3 pair, and I absolutely love them. I think they are the best shoes that I've ever trained in, and raced in, because I've had 2 PRs wearing them. Um, but I want you to just explain to people, because you've got different paces on your website, and I think there's a misconception, about that. Like, some people will say, "Well, I'm gonna get these shoes because if I get them, I'll run faster if I get the 5-minute mile pace, as opposed to, I'm really a 12-minute miler." And, so tell us where these people should stick to. Should they stick to their true pace, or should they get a shoe that's a little more aggressive?
Okay, well, this is the fundamental question here. And we decided that we would organize the different offerings according to pace because we thought it was a logical thing and people could kind of wrap their heads around it, and it made for a nice metric for like choosing one over the other. And I did not realize at the time that I was actually going to get caught up in all of the confusion about energy return and running faster and what makes you run faster. So, first of all, no shoe makes you run faster. Vimazi's included. Why do we have different shoes for different paces? It has to do with how the accelerations that I was talking about, how much jerk you get and like trying to protect your tendons and so forth, how that changes according to how fast you're running. And so we found like, oh, well, there are a number of different variables, and this is going to be too much for anybody to keep track of. So we're not going to talk about cadence and stride length and these different things. We're just going to talk about the simple thing about pacing, which, because people tend to um, run at a cadence that works for how tall they are. You just tend to, right? And I mean, you just look around. A very tall person tends to run with a slower cadence, and a shorter person tends to run with a higher cadence. And yeah, there's other reasons. I mean, I could get into it more, but like you just know, some people tend to do that, and because they tend to do that, even though you can change that, you can leap and don't run with really long strides, even though that's not your normal. Because you tend to do that, we found that it was a good metric just to use pace zones to then engineer the shoes so that we could strike the best balance between the softness in the rear foot and the firmness in the forefoot to get those things, because they're going to change, right? And it also gives people some difference, because the weight of your body also has some influence on this engineering as well. And by having some different ones, we can also accommodate some of the different body masses that are out there. And as long as you just keep in mind that, if you're basically staying within this zone here, you're getting the best combination of, heel and forefoot that you can get for the sake of your tendons.
So in essence, try to stick with the pace that you're at the current moment, right?
Well, you want to pick a shoe, right? And they've got a kind of a zone, right? That practically speaking, they're going to be hard to tell the difference as long as you're within that zone. But, for people who are training, let's just talk about people who are regularly training and doing different workouts. And you have workouts where you're running at a slower pace. And then you have workouts where you're running at a faster pace. And because there are some significant differences in the accelerations, the jerk that you're going to experience during those different workouts, you're going to be better off if you wear the shoe that's appropriate for that pace. And people have kind of they come to that conclusion anyways. You just try some stuff, right? And you're like, this shoe just feels too soft. I just feel like I'm leaving it all behind because it's compressing it too much. This is how we interpret it. We're not doing math in our head. We're just sort of saying it just feels too soft. And I feel like I want something that is firmer, or we use other words like it just feels more responsive, or whatever it is. Well, you're essentially coming to the same conclusion, that you want it to be a little bit firmer, and that's because that densities do need to change in order to match that different regimes of the accelerations that you're producing. And so we came out with this range, and I just want to take the opportunity to say, yes, you can fine tune these things, but you can't get it wrong if you're choosing a Vimazi, because they all have that fundamental structure of being firmer in the forefoot, and that's the most important part of it. So you get that basic thing, and then you fine tune it. But if you were only ever going to buy one shoe, right, you would be fine, and with just the one shoe. And so it's not going to do you harm. But if you wanted to really fine tune it, because you're doing a lot of training, so you're actually putting a lot more stresses on it, then you want to pay attention to how you're fine tuning, just like we pay attention to everything what we eat and how much we drink and how much we sleep and all of those things. It kind of goes along with all of that lifestyle that we have as athletes.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So finally, tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about Vimazi shoes.
Well, I encourage everybody, you can message me directly through the website. If you go on and you want to send a message, those all come to me, and I love to hear from people and answer your questions. And really, that's the most expedient way to get into a pair of Vimazis. And there's the full lineup out there. I can just tell you from our experience selling out there that the majority of the population is within the Z40 and Z70, and it's a bell curve, so it's mostly Z50, Z60. Actually, Z60 is kind of the top of the bell curve. So if you were going to start anywhere, that would be the model to start in at. and you will immediately start to get the benefits of this. And this is what everybody needs to be training in all the time, because if you're wearing and running in any other kind of shoes, and most of them are single densities. And oh, I did want to just mention this one other thing. Like we have all experienced other like dual density shoes, but they tend to be like, let's take an example of like a Brooks Beast, right? I mean, it's got these different densities, but they're in the heel, right? Because their idea is like, not going to let the heel go side to side. I'm going to build up these things with firmer foams. Well, they kind of go the other way in terms of the overall design, because they have a firmer heel and a softer forefoot. And we're saying, no, 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 that's backwards. You need a firmer forefoot and a softer heel, even though, you think that you're making this correction for overpronating. So, so you need to get into Vimazis and wear them, no matter what the workout is, because that's the design that's going to be preserving your tendons so that you can so that you can keep training and that you can use your training to get faster. Right?
Awesome.
You still have to do the work. And Vimazis allow you to do the work better and longer.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. This was so informative. Thank you so much, Scott, for being
Well,
on the
it's my
show.
pleasure. It's my passion and my pleasure. But thank you for having me on.
And if you want more information on this show or any other show, visit our website at atriathletesdiary.com, or you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Alexa, Google Play, you name it, we're out there. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.